What's up, everybody? Welcome to this week's episode of the Made to Win podcast. On this podcast, we focus on our soul health, discipleship, emotional health, just our inner selves. I think a new tagline I'm working with is "You were made to win," but it starts with losing yourself so that you can find life in Christ. And so that's what this whole podcast is about. Don't forget, you can check us out on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes. Make sure you like, subscribe, follow, all those fun things. But today I want to jump in because it's not a new guest, but last time he was a guest of kind of a circle or a community of people. And I'm pumped to just have a one-on-one conversation today with the Wade Joye. What's up, man?
Hey, Brandon. It's good to be here. Thanks for
Oh,
having me back.
yeah, man. I've been so pumped to have this conversation, especially just watching kind of you've been a busy man. I mean, like I'm seeing some of the stuff that the guys got you on and your journey right now. And I'm just like, man, my man is killing it right now.
Oh, thank you.
Um,
It's
Website.
definitely been a full year. I'll say that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. And we'll talk about this too toward the end, but you got website, podcast, ebook, writing a book. I saw that you got your first book deal, which is super cool, man. I'm pumped for that.
Oh, thank you.
And then, of course, traveling and speaking and coaching worship leaders, right?
Right. Yeah. I was actually just talking with somebody right before I hopped on with you about how there's a lot of irons in the fire right now, and I'm really praying through. God, how do I focus in this next season? So
Yeah.
maybe we'll get into all that too. But
Well, just a quick, maybe if somebody's listening today and they don't know who Wade Joye is, give us just a, 30,000 foot view of who you are, where you're located, and kind of the journeys God's got you on right now.
yeah, so I am married with three girls, three daughters. So my wife is Ferris. We've been married for 17 years now.
Come
And
on.
then I have twin daughters who are 14. I have my youngest daughter who will be 10 on this coming Sunday when we record this. And so I love my family. So that's like the main thing you should know. I love just the gift that they are to me. And we're a ministry family, so I was on staff at Elevation Church as the worship pastor for almost 15 years, and stepped off staff last December 2021, to preach and teach and try to share with other believers a lot of the journey that God's had me on in the last couple of years. Because it really changed my life, and I felt like God was asking me to steward that and share that with others as well.
Yeah.
I'm a retired worship leader, so there was a day when I would write songs and sing them and jump around on stage at church, but I'm too old for that now.
Man, that's super cool. Well, it's an honor to have you on this episode. And today I wanted to talk about, this kind of these rhythms to renew your soul. It was cool a few weeks ago. I got to have a conversation with Pastor Jonathan Moynihan from Baltimore Mosaic Church and got to hear kind of his journey, as well into this whole soul health, emotional health, and really, if we're honest, it is discipleship to Jesus, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
all of this stuff, I think, discipleship has turned into, for a lot of churches, it's turned into programs or classes or things like that. But man, what I'm finding in my journey through this, man, it is truly a transformation of the soul. And
Right.
I mean, I want you to kind of just take a few moments to share the last couple of years, how you've gotten to where you're at today, where this has become a really a primary focus of your own
Mm-hmm.
ministry, your own life.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I wish I was going before Jonathan Moynihan, because everything he says sounds so intelligent, and now I have to follow him. So thanks for
Oh,
that.
dude. Oh, dude. No, man.
um, nah, he's awesome. But yeah, this journey that God's had me on, really, it's not an overstatement to say that it's changed my life in the last several years. I grew up in the church. My granddad was a pastor. My dad was the music minister. My mom played the keys at church, and my aunt and uncle were the youth pastor. So I was like a ministry kid growing up. And there was a lot of good to that because I grew up in the church. But I remember always feeling from an early age that I had to do the right things, I had to look the part, say the right things, and as I got older, I started to run away from anything that felt legalistic because of how constraining that was for me as a kid. And while there was merit to that, what I realized as I've um, just navigated the spiritual journey in the last 3 or 4 years, that so much of my life I had run away from legalism, and what that caused me to do was really run away from discipline. And
Mm,
I started to confuse legalism and discipline, and they're not the same thing.
yeah.
Um, and so I'll come back to that in a second. But I was serving as the worship pastor at Elevation Church, like I said, and it's a fast-paced ministry. I was getting to do so many things that I loved, and got to see my three girls give their life to Christ, and got to do so many of the things that were my dreams in ministry.
Mm.
But I hit a point in June of 2020, which none of us are really doing great at that point anyway. So
No, yeah.
not to try to take us back to that,
No.
but I remember I was sitting on my back porch, and it was the birthday week for my twin. So we were celebrating. They were running around in the backyard, and we had people over. And I was just sitting there having this internal conversation with God, and just telling the Lord, Lord, I've preached that we're supposed to have abundant life in Christ. I've preached that your yoke is easy and your burden is light, that there's peace in your name. And right now I feel none of it. I
Mm.
feel no real presence of you in my life. I feel depleted. I feel drained. And we were coming out, not just all the stuff with COVID, but my youngest daughter has cystic fibrosis, so we had been worried about her. We were trying to figure out church in this new world. All this stuff was weighing down on me, and I was just crying out to God on that back porch, saying, God, I need help. I need to know that you're here. I need you to heal my soul. And I felt like the Lord, in a very clear way in my spirit, said, well, you're not giving me any space to do that healing work in you, because you have no discipline, you have no healthy rhythms. And that's where I realized that, in an effort to not be legalistic over the years, I had stopped having any consistent disciplines of discipleship, of prayer, of Bible study beyond just checking off a list that I'd done my quiet time,
Yeah.
or that, I had to prepare a message at church or something like that. And I felt like God was saying, it's not just those rhythms that you've got to get under control and establish in a healthy way, but even my exercise, my diet, all these things
Mm.
were connected. And so I came out of that season, number one, realizing I can't do everything at once. I can't start praying for an hour tomorrow. I can't completely change the way I eat. But we started, my wife and I, establishing like small practices, small rhythms
Mm.
that eventually led to new rhythms. And praying for 5 minutes or being in silence for 5 minutes became 10 minutes, became 15. And all of those things started to stack up. And even with my physical health, as that got better, I found I had more energy to bring my best as a husband, as a father, as a pastor. And all of this stuff started to compound over the next 6 months, to where I realized that I had been missing this my whole life as a Christian. And if I had been missing this, maybe everybody else has too.
Yes.
And I had tried to disciple others and create experiences for other people to encounter God without ever really discipling myself and teaching myself how to encounter God.
Mm.
And so it changed everything about my life. And I found that a lot of the struggles didn't go away, the pressures of life didn't go away, but now I had a base of a foundation of peace and a foundation of God's presence that I was more aware of,
Mm.
and healing that was taking place when I actually prioritized the space for it to happen.
Yes. Man, that's so good. I just taught our staff today about a rule of life. We've been going through this whole, I don't know if you've read, I may have texted it to you. I can't remember. Ruth Haley Barton, Strengthening the Soul of Your Leadership. Did I
I,
send it to you?
I think you have, but I haven't read it yet.
Oh my gosh, man. It's so good. Um, the whole premise is really about solitude, but
Mhm.
she basically goes on Moses's journey, of how his soul was strengthened through one-on-one times with the presence of the Lord. And but I was telling them, like, especially with the monastic practices, I think, you mentioned something that I thought was interesting. It seems like people live in the extremes.
Mm-hmm.
If they feel like, man, this is legalism, well, then they just run as far away from any kind of discipline whatsoever. But then, there is a level where, we do make these things the end instead of the means to the end.
Right.
And, I think the conversation is like, I don't do these things to be holy. I do these things to lead me to the Holy One. Right.
Right.
And
Well,
so go
well,
ahead.
even that with legalism, realizing that legalism is really performance based. It's trying to
Yes.
appear righteous before God. It's trying to appear holy before others.
Mm-hmm.
And you can never do that. It's a losing battle. It's too crushing a weight to bear. But discipline is structuring your life around your priorities, around your passions, around
Mm.
saying, this is where I find life. So if this
Yes.
is where life is, I want to be here and I want to orient my life around this. And it's two different ways to view faith, to view your walk with the Lord. One is very, it's like I said, it's defeating, it's crushing, and the other is life giving. It's where
Yes.
you can flourish, and that's what abiding in Christ really is.
Mm.
Because even realizing when Jesus said, "You will abide in my love if you obey my commands," I used to think abiding was just thinking good thoughts about God every now and then,
Mm-hmm.
but abiding actually it takes intentionality, it takes obedience, it takes discipline to actually not receive God's love, but actually to become aware of it and
Yeah.
walk in the fullness of it.
Man, that's so good. And it is interesting, because I think, some of the conversations we've been having is like, I think when your outer world has completely been torn down, I think, you mentioned COVID being one of those moments where it's like,
Mm-hmm.
you have nothing left of your outer world. That is when truly your inner world is exposed.
Yeah.
And there's this moment of awareness where it's like, man, what have I really been doing to my soul? You know?
Mm-hmm.
And I think even the conversation that I've been having with our staff in church, like I'm actually, of course, this podcast will air a few weeks later, but we're going to be in the middle of this vision series. I'm starting it this Sunday actually, but called an awakening. I feel like that's the journey I've been on. It's just this moment of awareness of
Mm-hmm.
just like, man, something's missing from this whole journey because I don't know if you had a chance to. Are you familiar with John Mark Comer's Practicing the Way stuff?
I am.
I don't know if you were able to log on to their conference, but man, it was so much. It was so good, man. It was so
The
rich.
the what I saw was well, this wasn't the practice. Sorry, I'm actually thinking of the 24/7 prayer conference.
Yes, yes,
Where I heard a sermon on prayer from Tim Mackey that blew my mind, but maybe we can talk about that
mm,
later. I didn't
yeah.
get to see the practicing the way with though.
But it's just this moment of realization, where it's like, man, I don't know if I want to spend the rest of my life trying to build church around a stage only, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's either Comer or Staten just talked about how like the difference between building church around a stage versus building church around a table, and really living out these practices in this life, this abundant life,
Mm-hmm.
not just, I think the problem is we promote a life that some of us don't live ourselves,
Yeah.
and so it's just getting to that place where it's like, man, I really want that. I want that abundant life to be as attractive in my own life as it was in Jesus's. There was something about Jesus, the way he lived, that people said, that's different.
Yeah.
That's different.
Well, there's I wish I could find the quote, but there's in Dallas Willard's book, Spirit of the Disciplines,
Mm,
he talks about how we all want the power that Jesus showed in his life. We want to be able um, to do these amazing things that Christ did, but we're unwilling to live the life that Christ lived and
mhm.
order our lives around the same priorities. And
Yeah.
yes, life is different now. It's not saying you have to go back and be a nomad in
Right.
in the
Right.
Middle East,
Right.
but you do see that Jesus practiced regular solitude,
Mhm.
regular prayer. He practiced community. He practiced a way of life that is accessible to us through the power of the Spirit. but
Mm,
we don't prioritize that same thing. And because we don't prioritize it, I believe we don't access that same power.
mm. Man, that's so good. Well, and it's, conversation we're having too is this whole thing like we are being formed by something or someone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, you think about the time we invest in being formed by the spirit versus the time that's being invested in being formed by the world. And it's like, well, no wonder, I've got all this anxiety or these insecurities or worries or, these different things. It's that we're just battling in our spirit and our soul. And it's because we're not making ourselves available
Well,
to, the presence of God. So man, that's so good. So why do you think, I know we've kind of already just dove in, but why do you think it is vital for a believer to focus on their inner world and to bring back some of these practices that are so rich and life-giving?
I mean, I think it's vital because that's what Jesus focused on.
Mm,
If you look at the teachings of Jesus, it always started in the heart, and he always stressed that it's out of the overflow of the heart that the mouth speaks.
mm,
He didn't just address a lustful action; he would address the lustful thought underneath the action.
yeah.
And so, I think your inner world will always affect your outer world. Um, and so, you talked about renewal and being shaped by something else. But even when Paul's talking about being transformed by the renewing of your mind, we don't experience the peace of God, the joy of God, the fruits of the Spirit without renewing the way we actually look at our life, without renewing our thought patterns, without. I had a friend of mine one time tell me his number one piece of advice was being ruthless about making the right heart choice,
Wow.
because when he did that, um, that is when he gave the Holy Spirit space to actually produce the fruits of the Spirit in him, even if he didn't feel like it at the time.
Mm,
And so I think church today, even in when you're talking about building it around a stage, when you build something around a stage, then the level of transformation that you're asking of somebody is very low. You're just asking them to show up at an event,
yes.
and that's it's
Yes.
event management.
Right.
But if you're building it around a table, if you're building it around relationship and intimacy, that's an internal transformation. That's a higher level of transformation that you're fostering, that you're trying to elicit. And so I think the whole Christian life is about heart transformation.
Mm,
Yet we spend so much time thinking it's about behavior modification. And I do think heart transformation leads to behavior change, but it has to go in that order. It can't go in the reverse order.
yeah.
Um, and so I just look at what Jesus focused on, and Jesus focused on the heart, and then that led to transformed lives.
Mm.
And so that's where I want to start with my life too.
And I think what's powerful about that too, when you talk about him focusing on the heart, is it just seemed like it was always a beautiful invitation to watch how he lived his life. When you think about discipleship, the whole idea of being with Jesus, be like Jesus, live your life as Jesus, if Jesus were you, it's that moment in John 1 where John the Baptist disciples get pointed in the direction of Jesus, and he just
Mm-hmm.
turns around and says, "What do you want?" You know, and and then he invites them to come and see. And the Bible
Mm-hmm.
says they spent the rest of the day with him. And I think about all the moments when people ask Jesus questions. I don't think we realize the depth of, like, here are some Jewish men who grew up in the Hebrew ways asking him to teach them how to pray. Like, there had to be something about Jesus's prayer life that was so unique and
Yeah.
powerful for them to say, like, I know we've been taught how to pray before, but there's something different about
Yeah.
this way of praying.
Yeah.
You know?
I want to know how to pray like you pray.
Yes, yes. And that to me is the beauty of, these practices and the beauty of getting to that inner part of yourself. Because I think that was the problem he was trying to point out with the Pharisees, is like they've got a lot of behaviors down.
Mm-hmm.
Their hearts are far from me. And like you think about the sting of that moment, like these are people that everybody else thought if anybody's going to heaven, it's these guys. If anybody is
Right.
close to God, it's these guys. and yet they were the furthest away from God.
Well, and what I also find is when we put in these rhythms of prayer, of contemplation, of silence, of letting the Holy Spirit search your heart, that, in my experience, is when a lot of these sins and this dysfunctional thought pattern or emotions, those start to come to the surface when I actually create the space for God to search my heart and to point them out. Because there's a lot of, like you said, we all know how to play the part right
Yeah.
now, but we tend to give ourselves a pass and other people a pass for certain sins that we believe are socially acceptable. So we give jealousy a pass, we give bitterness a pass, we give certain lustful thoughts a pass. There's all these kind of things that we just think are okay, and we just kind of push them down and down in our heart. But those are the things that end up taking root and cause the most damage and destruction over time, the things that we're not willing to identify or name. And I think it's what I found is it's in this time of silence that I'm forced to confront those things about myself and bring them into the light of Jesus, not in a way that brings condemnation, but actually there's so much love and grace and forgiveness that happens in that when you realize the depth of God's love for you and that there's no shame in bringing this to him.
Yeah.
And so that's been such a freeing part of it too. And sometimes it's a painful part to confront and realize, oh gosh, I didn't realize there was so much pride in me right now.
Yeah.
But if I never stopped to just be still, I could go for years just pushing that down and never dealing with it.
Mm. And I think that is one of the most valuable things in the kind of the weaponry of a believer is confession, right? But
Yeah.
it's the one thing that we're so terrified of and ashamed of, but it's the one thing that actually can lead to freedom, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is some of the issues with the way people approach church now. Church is the place where you have to show up and you got to act right, dress right, make sure that you're not misbehaving, but I love what Rich always get confused on how to say his name. I think it's Rich Villados. But he pastors Pete Scazzeri's church he
Yeah.
planted. And he said church should be the place where all the broken believers show up with that admission
Mm-hmm.
of that's why I'm here. I'm here because I
Right.
am broken, not because I have it all together, in the South. And I know you probably experience this in North Carolina too, but it's like, I don't know how many conversations you ever had with people where it's like, hey, I would love for you to come to church with me. And it's like, I've got some things in my life I need to get cleaned up before I can come to church,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, me too, bro.
We all do.
Yeah, we all do.
Well, even when Paul says, for his power is made perfect in my weakness, I tend to want to hide my weakness.
Mm,
But when I do that, what I'm doing is I'm denying myself access to God's power. And I think there's power, number one, in bringing it to light before the Lord, but then also there's power that I can access through somebody else who says, hey, I'm right there with you. I've been through that too.
mhm.
Let me help you. And I close myself off from that when I'm not willing to confess, when I'm not willing to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Um, there's the part in that I was recently studying. You brought up John the Baptist earlier, but it's when John the Baptist is in prison and he has this moment that on the surface it looks like doubt, where he sends the message to Jesus of, "Are you the one who is to come, or is there someone else?"
Mhm.
And I was reading that recently, and I was struck that for John to get that message to Jesus, and then to get the reassurance where Jesus says, "Tell John what you see and hear," he had to first open up and confess his doubt and his weakness to his friends. He had to actually open up to the people that they were his disciples. He was their teacher. So he had to
Wow.
step down from a position of strength and say, I don't know what's going on anymore. I need you to go get this message to Jesus. So he had to be vulnerable with them to
Yeah.
receive the reassurance that he needed from the Lord.
Wow.
And that's just encouraged me that um, sometimes the most faith filled thing you can say, not just to God, but to other people, is help.
Mm,
And that's when you can truly access power.
that's so good. I'm writing that one down. That's good.
Thanks. It's something that God's really, because I tend to not want to do that. I tend to want to look like I have it all together. And so this is something that the Lord's really just hammering home with me. Like you've got to stop doing that.
Well, I mean, Jesus did it, right? I mean, in the
Hmm.
garden. And
Yeah.
I mean, he had to come back and even trust in these human relationships. Hey guys, I need you to pray for me right now.
Right.
My
So true.
soul, my soul is so broken at the point of despair. Like
Hmm.
that's to me that is such a powerful, vulnerable moment for the Son of God, right? Where he is.
Yeah.
It's written down for everybody to read that even the Son of God in his perfect, humanity and perfection as divinity is saying like, man, I'm on the verge of my soul just being totally in despair and broken, and I need somebody to pray for me and lift me up. Like that's, man, that's so powerful. I love that line of help is the most spiritual thing you can ask for.
Yeah. It sometimes the most powerful prayers are the simplest ones.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so tell me a little bit about, I know I was listening to some of your podcasts and of course just some of your stuff on social media, but I know, and this is something I am going to try to attempt to do in 2023, through Jonathan's story and your story of trying to do a retreat at a monastery. So I would love to hear kind of like how you got connected with
Yeah.
that and kind of your journey in doing that.
Yeah. So I went, spent about a 4 day, mostly silent prayer retreat at Mepkin Abbey in Moncks Corner, South Carolina. So it's the first weekend of February. I was about a month out from stepping off the staff at Elevation, and really just wanted to seek God about what was next. And just and I've been reading so much in the previous year, whether it's from Pete Scazzaro or John Mark Comer or Dallas Willard, just a lot about these monastic practices.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to just kind of go somewhere completely different, make myself a little uncomfortable. And so I go there and I drive up on a Friday and I get there a little bit early. And there's about 12 people that are there at one time, and you kind of do your own individual prayer retreat. You're not really supposed to talk to anybody. And I get there that Friday, and your cell phones don't work in the building because I think it's copper roofs that keep the signal from going.
Oh,
So
wow.
I couldn't use my cell phone, and we hadn't had orientation yet. And I sat there in my room for like 2 hours. It was raining outside. And I was like, God, what in the world am I doing here? This is miserable. I'm going to go crazy for 4 days without having any connection to the outside world. And I came so close to just getting in my car and turning around. But thankfully, I didn't. Um, because the next day, uh, I felt like the Lord just really, the more I got over the addiction I had and the withdrawal symptoms I had from being connected
Mm,
to all these outside
yeah.
things. And the more I started to slow down and just learn to be present in the moment, the more I felt God began to speak to me.
Mm,
And I mean, we could spend an hour talking about what I learned there, but um, I felt like the first night I was just journaling so much of the fears I had, the insecurities I had in that season. God was like showing me a lot of sin and pride in my heart. So there was a lot of confession in my journal. And then Saturday became more and more of just like reflecting on God's goodness in that season. And then Sunday became more where I felt like God was saying, I want you to start asking, be specific about what you want to see in this next year. And on Monday, as I was leaving, I felt like the Lord just laid on my heart. If you bring me your entire inner world, the good stuff, the bad stuff, the pure motives, the impure motives, I can sort that out. But I want you to bring me your whole heart. And if you do that, if you bring me your inner world, I'll take care of your outer world. So that was probably the main revelation I got from God, and just really learning to enjoy the slow, still rhythms of just being in his presence and not feeling the need to have to manufacture something. And then there were the aspects of getting to go and watch the fixed prayer that the monks engaged in like 7 times a day, and how they prayed through the Psalms from a very like musical, almost like a chanting type prayer.
wow.
And just and I started to pray through the Psalms in a different way after that weekend. I love the reverence and the beauty of some of the ceremony, like in Mass and some of the prayer times. And so there was a lot that God challenged me on. And yes, I feel like our tradition focuses so much on the intimacy we can have with God
Mm-hmm.
that sometimes we lose the reverence that we should have for God. And
Wow.
so learning how to carry both of those,
Mm.
that we can come boldly before the throne of grace with confidence because of what Christ did for us, um, yet still be in awe that while we were in the presence of the living God.
Yeah.
And so that was a powerful moment for me. And then I had on my last day there, we weren't supposed to talk to anybody, like I said, but the last day, this lady came up to me during dinner time, and the meals were really awkward because you're not supposed to talk. And so every like slurp of your soup, it sounds like it's so loud. But but this lady came bent down and said, "Hey, I was reading this book today, and I felt like I was supposed to give you this one page." And I read that page, and it was exactly an answer to two specific things I've been praying that weekend.
Wow.
And just it was just a reminder that the Lord will speak to you when you actually make space to listen.
Mm.
And so I don't think you have to go to a monastery to do that,
No. Uh-uh.
but I do think sometimes it's helpful to get out of your comfort zone and put yourself in a position where you have extra time to be in God's or to be aware of God's presence.
Mm.
So that might look like an afternoon after work for somebody.
Yeah.
It might look like taking your lunch and your lunch hour and going and doing something that's completely focused on the Lord. But I want to be better about prioritizing those type of rhythms in my life.
Yeah. Man, that's so good. That's so good. You're talking about like, you don't have to go to a monastery to do this. I was thinking about something Tyler Staton talked about when he was talking about a rule of life, but he was saying anytime you've seen like these saints of God do something impactful for the kingdom, it started with a vow or a rule of life. It started with this, like, this is what I live by in order to experience the presence of God in my life and to abide in Him. And
Mm-hmm.
the first thing he said, the thing you always see is that it is counter formative to the culture. Like when you go to the Desert Fathers, it was like, okay, if this is what the rest of the world is reveling in right now and excited about, how do I deform from that and almost go against the grain of what culture
Right.
is telling me to do? And I think, and I would love to hear your opinion on this, but it's like, why is this so difficult for people? Like I hear people say all the time, I've never heard God speak to me. And man, when you said that, like, man, we don't make ourselves available for God to speak. Like there is such I don't even know if people realize the resistance that we face every single day to keep ourselves from the voice of God. So I'd love to hear
Mm.
even your thoughts on like, why does this seem like when we start talking about some of this stuff, there are people going to be like, man, that just sounds weird to me. I'm not, a monk. I'm not a monk. I'm not a spiritual person whatever. Like, I think there's the average person that might be listening that says like, that seems really difficult for me. Like dive into that.
Yeah, I think there are several reasons why. Um, some of it is it's a very non-productive thing to do from a
Mm,
strictly immediate results oriented standpoint. And as a culture, I think everyone would agree with this. We're addicted to efficiency, to productivity,
yes.
and we've built so much of our identity around that.
Mhm.
And I would say having to readjust to the rhythm of slow, whether it's the pace of life, whether it's prayer, it's just that is so countercultural. And so I think that's a hard thing just to stop in general.
Yeah.
We don't know how to be bored anymore. We don't know how to just not just start looking and scrolling at our phone. So there's a bit of like you said, a deformation that we have to relearn how to focus our attention at all. So I think we're starting from a deficit there in general.
Mm,
Um, then when it comes to prayer, I think there's a lot of confusion around maybe there's disappointment because, hey, I prayed in the past and these things that I prayed for didn't happen. So you don't want to get hurt again by getting your hopes up.
yeah.
I think there's I don't really know how to pray. Am I just supposed to say whatever comes to mind? Am I supposed to pray the Lord's Prayer? Um, I think there's the boredom aspect. A lot of people just, it
Mm,
doesn't seem very fun. um, but I think it comes from a misunderstanding about what prayer is supposed to be, about that it's never meant to be a means to an end. To
yeah.
me, prayer is the end and the reward itself, because prayer is how we have communion with God.
Mm,
It's how we hear his voice, it's how we bring our whole heart to him. And that was the way we were designed to function in the garden. That's the way we'll function in the new heavens and new earth.
wow.
And we have access to that now. So if we can truly realize um, how important and essential prayer is to actually fulfill our function as a human
Yeah.
and as a follower of Jesus, and that prayer can be raw, it can be authentic. It's a lot more listening sometimes than speaking, but also when we speak, it doesn't have to be sanitized. It can be it can be vulnerable. I think when we start to realize the vastness of what prayer actually is, then you want to lean into it in a different way. You want to engage with it in a
Yeah.
different way.
Yeah.
And I would say a lot of times we tend to think we have to immediately start at the place of like the desert fathers. Oh, I've got
Mhm.
to pray for an hour. I've got to pray um, in tongues. I've got to pray, whatever it
Right.
is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And rather than saying, okay, I can pray, I can do this for 5 minutes, and
Yes.
I'm going to try to spend. I'm going to set a timer on my phone. I'm going to try to spend 2 minutes in silence and just say, God, will you speak to me? Even if it's not in these 2 minutes, speak to me at some point throughout the day.
Yeah.
And what you find is, even in those small moments, your eyes start to be open for ways that God actually is moving throughout the day.
Mm,
Um, but I think that's something you start to see over time. So we try it for a day, for 2 days, for a week, and our life doesn't dramatically change, so we stop. It's the willingness to be persistent and consistent in it where you start to see the fruit.
yeah. I think that was Ruth Haley Barton's point with Moses. Like we see a moment where he runs from Egypt. He ends up right beside a well, which is a metaphor for the soul. And you see a man who, in one moment, is so broken and angry and, has all this family dysfunction and all this stuff to where like 40 years go by and he encounters God in this moment in the desert with a burning bush, and it's just this idea of like, I think, like you said, I think people expect some sort of like epiphany or some sort of like magic moment that tomorrow or in a few weeks, if I do this over a certain amount of time, in the next few months, I should be like, I'm going to be the next
Right.
Billy Graham or whatever in my spiritual walk, and not realizing like this is a lifelong journey that we're going on. I'm not doing this to go on this short journey for God to change my life tomorrow, but it's changing my inner world for
Yeah.
years and years and years.
And even just within 1 week in my prayer time and in my journaling this last week, I went from at the big this was last week on a Monday, journaling about how overcome with gratitude I felt that day about
Mhm.
so many things from God. And then 5 days later, I was journaling like, God, I don't feel you at all. I feel like and I mean, massive swings in my own heart.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and I think I used to beat myself up about that. I'm like, oh, I can't believe I'm like 5 days later, I'm feeling this way. And now I'm just finding that's just being real. That's just being
Yes. Yes.
um, a regular person. And it's coming to God and just showing up no matter how I feel,
Mm,
that I'm learning that over time, that's how the transformation takes place. It's
yeah.
showing up saying, God, I don't feel it today. And then even being willing to try. The reason I like referring to them more as rhythms than disciplines is because they're really the same thing. But I think rhythm highlights the fact that it can change over time. And so the way I might pray in this season might look different in the next season. So this summer, I really enjoy doing prayer walks in the morning, and I would pray through different Psalms and use that as a prompt to pray for different people. And then it started getting really dark in the morning again. So I don't do that anymore. And I'm finding new rhythms back at the house.
Yeah.
But it's when something gets stale, it's trying to find, okay, there's the rhythm of prayer that I'm going to hold on to, but I can flow in that rhythm differently in each season.
Yes. Yes. No, that's so good. I'm same way. Like, I have a spot on my back porch that I love to sit in my rocking chair, and I can overlook these cornfields. But as it gets colder, it's tough for me to do that in the morning. So I have a spot in
Mm-hmm.
the house that I go to now. But yeah, I'm so glad you said that, because that's exactly what I was going to bring up. Is like, I can look through my journal and there's times where it's like, dude, I wrote like I couldn't stop writing today. And then there's days where it's like, it's like, well, I don't, I'm just not feeling it today, or just,
I think I'm a Christian today.
yeah, I'm not real sure. And then there's days where it's like, man, I can feel like, man, I'm so emotionally healthy. I can handle anything today. And then there's days where it's like, I got an email or a text, and now I got to go back to counseling tomorrow. It's like, what happened?
Uh-huh.
But I think that's the beauty of it, right? It's the beauty of this journey. You brought up the garden, because I think, and I was just thinking about this when you said it, because I thought it was so powerful. But this idea of rhythms, I think the thing that we miss is, like, even in the garden, there was that rhythm, right? God
Mm-hmm.
showed up every day in the same place. Every day he showed up to walk in the garden, to speak to Adam and Eve. And then, of course, you see that powerful moment, like where one day that rhythm was thrown off because they were in hiding. And when you were talking, it gave me this picture of, like, I don't know that they were hiding as in the fact of like they're hiding behind a tree, watching God move. I think hiding comes in the form of, like, we just remove ourselves from a rhythm, for God
Mm-hmm.
to speak. And hiding looks like busyness. Hiding looks like worry,
Oh
anxiety,
yeah.
basically putting ourselves in a different space where God cannot speak to us in that
That's
rhythm.
so good.
And I think that's what a lot of people run into, is like, it's not realizing, man, that God is still in the rhythm of speaking to us. We've just removed ourselves from that space, to hear
Mm-hmm.
from him. Man, that's so good. And I would, any tips on, like, and we can talk about this offline, or shoot me a text or something on how to, like, get connected on some of these places. Cause I was talking to Jonathan about it, but I mean, trying to figure out, like, how did you call, did you email this place about trying to get into one of these retreats?
Yeah, I just looked it up online and there was a way that you could sign up and apply. They offer, I mean, they're limited spaces and you
Oh,
usually
okay.
have to sign up in advance, but they host these retreats throughout the year, at
Yeah.
least for this particular one.
That's sweet, man. That's super cool.
I can even send you the link and you can put it in your show notes or something if you wanted
Yeah.
to.
That'd be great. That'd be fantastic. Well, I know, like, you, of course, you're working. I don't know if you're at liberty to tell us about the book you're working on and what that's kind of about, but I would love
Mhm.
for you to talk to us about your ebook, at least, because I know it's free, it's downloadable, and you can even give us some information to put in the show notes on how people can download that free ebook. But that ebook is about the seven rhythms to renew your soul. Is that correct? Did I say that
Yeah,
right?
to renew the health of your soul. Yep.
Renew the health of your soul. So, talk to us about that and kind of what inspired that, and kind of what you hope for people to get from this.
Yeah, it really was my attempt to put down uh, the areas that found helpful for me in my own rule of life. Um, and as I was doing a lot of coaching in the last year, and I was walking people through finding healthy rhythms, and really latching onto that word of rhythm of let's find, because I'm an old worship leader and I think musically sometimes. Um, there's certain notes that you play within a song, and the rhythm is kind of the speed at which you play those notes. And sometimes they're faster, sometimes they're slower, but the song provides the structure um, that um, allows you to operate and flow in a rhythm. And so I think this was my way of saying, let's take these seven rhythms that speak to key areas of your heart and your life,
Mm,
and realize that you're not, you don't just have a spiritual you and then a physical you and then a social you. It's all your you. It's all together.
yeah.
It's all integrated, and one rhythm affects the other rhythm. And so there's a series of questions with each of them, and I can even tell you what the rhythms are. Let's see, I have it pulled up. And so it's a rhythm of contemplation on God,
Mm,
a rhythm of caring for your body and mind, a rhythm of ceasing to strive and choosing to rest, a rhythm of corporate worship and contribution in church, a rhythm of cheerful generosity in your time and resources, a rhythm of close connection and confession with trusted friends, and then a rhythm of celebration and fun. And so, what the ebook does is it walks you through, number one, some scriptural foundation for why each of those are important, then gives you some questions to ask yourself, and then some prompts of here are, I call them small step options and stretching step options. So, if you really want to just dip your toe in the water with the rhythm, here's a place you can start. It doesn't have to look like this, but it's at least a way to get you thinking. And then if you really want to stretch yourself, here's what that could look like. And so I found it, I really made it to be a resource for the people that I was coaching. And then as I was putting it together, I was like, well, let's just make this available to everybody because it's helpful for me and it seemed helpful for them. And so that's kind of where the idea was born.
That's
So
all.
it's in essence, it's my way to help people craft a rule of life.
Yeah. No, that's so good. And maybe share with us like a few things, how you started off with simple little practices and how it turned and how it's kind of maybe a few that's kind of morphed into like this has gotten deeper and more, I guess, more in depth for yourself. Like what are a few
Yeah.
things that's happened in your own life?
I mean, even like prayer would be a great one to start with. So I started in 2020 with trying to incorporate, number one, times of silence and then fixed prayer throughout the day. Those are some of my goals. And a friend of mine encouraged me to try to every day at lunch pray the Lord's Prayer. And so what I did was at lunch, I would just take a walk around the office at elevation and I would just pray the Lord's Prayer and then try to just walk in silence for the rest of my rest of that 5 minutes. And not every day felt spiritual when I did that. Some days it felt stale. But what it did was in the middle of my day, a lot of times when I would be at my most stressed after like a bunch of meetings, it would help me pause and remember that God was with me, that He was going to be the one to give me my daily bread, that if any bitterness was starting to take root, it would remind me to forgive. And so it was a reset in the middle of my day towards faith for the remainder of my day. And so then that helped me to adopt wanting to do that on a regular basis. And then at night, doing a prayer of examine at night. So I really started to embrace fixed prayer just because I prayed the Lord's Prayer every day for a year.
Yeah.
But it was that small thing that was a building block. And then with like times of silence in the morning, it started with doing Lectio 365, that app. And
Yes.
that had like very small targeted times of silence. And then it was, okay, I'm going to try 5 minutes of silence. And then after a few weeks of getting comfortable with that, then I would try 10 and then I would do 20. And then it was experimenting with, I'd never been a journaler before. So let me try doing a journal. And but it all started with me just carving out a little bit of time in my prayer life.
Yeah.
And small wins became fueled greater momentum, I would say. So that's how my prayer life, it worked. I would say too, let me pick another one. Okay, for like rhythm of caring for your body and your mind, I started to try to be way more consistent with my workouts and with my diet. Because before then, I'd ate like a 5-year-old. I loved anything with powdered sugar on it, any kind of pastry, any donut. But I found that when I exercised more on a regular basis and I ate better, had a clearer mind, had a clear focus, I
Yeah.
felt better. But it wasn't just that. I realized that my wife and I at night, we had gotten in the habit of saying watching our shows was how we would unwind. And
Right.
there's nothing wrong with that, but that's all we were doing at night. And I
Yeah.
realized that we could spend hours doing that and then I'd go to bed late and I'd struggle to pray in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
So we decided to we did this for a long time too. In this rhythm, we did Sunday night to Wednesday night. There was going to be no TV, and we would either read or talk. And then on the weekends, we would let ourselves watch TV. And just doing that changed the game for us too.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Uh, And it got me back in a rhythm of reading to where I realized how much I love to read. And I was able to read more books that year than I'd ever done in my life. And we're not in that same rhythm of, never any TV from Sunday to Wednesday
Right.
right now,
Right.
but we know when we get out of balance with it now.
Mm.
So that was another example of monitoring. Hey, this used to be what I thought filled my soul,
Yeah.
and now it doesn't. Sabbath is another good example. Sabbath to me used to just be a day off,
Mm-hmm.
and now I'm real because there was no intentionality to it. So now we're, as a family, we on Sabbath, before it used to be, let's just get all of our chores done. Or like when we first started this rhythm, we're like, let's just get our chores done before Sabbath so we can not do any work on Sabbath.
Yeah.
And that was a win. Now we're doing things like putting our phones in these little buckets or this one bucket so we're not on our phone during
Yeah.
Sabbath.
That's good.
And now we're trying to do a rhythm of communion on Sabbath. So we're constantly trying to experiment and change and add on it. But it all
Yeah.
starts with that first step.
Dude, and it's incredible. The Let Deal 365 stuff is so good. They have a family version too. I don't know if you've seen that or not, but that's actually what we do with our kids before they go to school every morning. But what's powerful about that is that it becomes, are you still there? Oh no, Wade's froze up on us. Uh, well, hopefully we'll get Wade back in just a moment. Are you there?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know what happened. It cut
Uh,
out for a moment. We can edit that out though.
okay.
What I was saying is the Let Deal 365 stuff is a game changer. They have a family version. I don't know if you've seen the family version or not.
I've seen that. Yeah.
But we do that with our kids before they go to school every morning. And so that's a cool rhythm that they've gotten into. Like we know, hey, we're going to gather in the kitchen at this time, walk through this app together, pray together, and then go to school. But what's really awesome is that without even like prompting it, like my son now, he's 7, and he won't go to bed until we listen to the nighttime.
Oh, I love that.
He's like, we listen to Lectio, and that's like his prompt. Like he ends up falling asleep by the end of it. And I'm like, man, this is amazing. Like, I'm hoping that's like a habit that he keeps in his life
Yeah.
as he gets older. But that's been a really powerful tool that at first it was just like it was something special for me, but now it's kind of, rubbing off on my family. And I got some guys at church that I just, said, hey guys, check this out if you want to, and then it was cool. It was just like guy after guy was texting like, man, this app is awesome. Like I've incorporated it into my day and all this stuff. And it's like, it really is like, I think sometimes we think that it's so big and grandiose, we can't ever get there, but it's literally 5 to 10 minutes. How can you take 5 to 10 minutes and maybe even in multiple increments in your day that, before you know it, it's like, man, I've spent 45 minutes in prayer throughout the day, maybe not in one setting, but throughout
Right.
the day, I've brought my attention back to the presence of God and the awareness that he's there. And so,
Yeah.
and that's so powerful. Um, so what is one particular rhythm that you would challenge people? And I'm assuming I'm probably know what you're going to say, but if you could say like, hey, do this, like if somebody's listening right now and they're like, where do I start? What's the one rhythm you would say that this right here will lead to the other rhythms that are going to, renew the health of your soul? What's the one you would tell people to start with?
I mean, it's the one that I start the ebook with, which is the rhythm of contemplation on God.
Mm,
Um, just because I think prayer is it's the foundation of the Christian practice of like the way we're supposed to live our lives. Like Paul says, pray without ceasing,
yeah.
but we don't even know how to pray for 5 minutes right now.
Yeah.
And so if you can just like win there, like learn, like pray the way you can right now
Mm,
and start with Lectio 365. That's a great, like I tell everybody I know to start there. And then you can pray through a psalm. You can try being silent for 2 minutes and ask God
mm,
to speak. There's so many different tools. I think God just wants your heart. He just wants you to like say,
yes.
to recognize your need and your dependence on him.
Yes.
And so I think if you can start there, then your heart's going to be more in tune to hear God's voice leading you in the other rhythms.
Yeah.
But I think it's just pressing. pause on your day and saying, God, I'm going to lay down the idol of productivity. I'm going to lay down the idol of trying to be significant and be special. And I'm just going to pause and be in your presence. And I think God honors that, the promise of draw near to God and he'll draw near to you.
Yeah.
His presence is always there, but we're not opening our hearts to see it and to
Yeah.
experience it. And so that's where I would start.
You probably heard that quote from Comer where he says, I guess it was an interview that they did with, wow, my brain just went dead. The famous, wow, my brain, famous nun,
Oh, Mother
Teresa, Mother
Teresa?
Teresa. Wow. Okay. I couldn't even think of Mother Teresa. That's bad. But they did an interview, I guess, with her and they asked her like, so what do you say to God when you pray? And she says, nothing. I just sit there. And he said, well, what does God say to you? And she says, nothing. He just listens. And they said that they're just confused. You can see the confused look on their faces. And she was just like, if you can't understand that, I can't explain it to you. It's just like this powerful
Yeah.
moment of just like, I think we do miss the power of just contemplating on the presence of God and being in the moment with him. I think we have to fill it with a bunch of words and a bunch of stuff. But just contemplating on his presence is huge, man. So that's so golden.
And it's also where I think it's Henry Nouwen who talks about, really rooting yourself that you're God's beloved.
Mm,
Um, and it's when you sit in silence that not only are you contemplating on God, but then you're also able to get a fresh understanding of how God feels towards you.
yeah.
And man, to be able to fill your soul up in that way helps you not be as in need of trying to fill it up in ways that are more destructive.
Yes. So if you can, tell us a little bit about the book you're working on.
Yeah, so it is done, it is turned in, and will be out sometime in the fall of 2023.
Let's
So
go.
I
That's
don't think
awesome.
I'm allowed to say the title just
That's
yet,
fine. That's fine. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but it's an exploration on uh, how I believe in not just in culture, but in the church today, we have tended to idolize our own dreams and our own
Mm,
plans.
yeah.
And we take those and we put them in the place of our purpose. And
Mm,
so when those don't happen, then we get angry with God because we think he
yeah.
took our purpose away, or and because we're operating with the wrong sense of purpose, the wrong sense of what a calling actually is. And so this book helps look at a biblical understanding of what calling and purpose actually is and how to still dream, but to dream with open hands
Yeah.
and to surrender our hearts to the Lord and to find the beauty in when Jesus says those who want to save their life must lose it.
Mm,
Um, and so it's about that. And I look at the story of David when David wanted to build the temple and God said no to that dream of his.
yeah.
But how David wanted to build a house for God, but God wanted to build a house through David.
Mm,
Um, and so yeah, and I look at my own life of being a worship leader who got to build something that was my dream at the time, but then I had to step away from it and realize that I'd built my identity on the wrong thing. And I've got kids with special needs who we had certain dreams for our family that didn't pan out the exact way we thought, but God met us with his goodness and grace in those situations. So everyone has some dream in their life that didn't work out.
yeah.
So this book is meant to help you process what to do with those dreams.
Yeah. Man, that's so good. Speaking of, you have a podcast, Dreamers and Disciples,
That's right.
and that's on Spotify, iTunes. Are you on YouTube or no?
Not on YouTube yet, but I think that's close.
Okay. So definitely encourage people to check that podcast out. So what are a few, like I always like to end my episodes with a few keys to victory. You could give people
Mm-hmm.
just one or two, like, hey, here's how you can win today. Like today, if you're going to take away something from this episode, what are some of those keys to victory you give somebody?
Yeah, the keys. I mean, I'll just get really practical.
Yeah.
I would say try taking 5 minutes at lunch in your day and just do what I did. Pray the Lord's Prayer.
Yeah.
Pray it, and then say, God, will you please speak to me?
Yeah.
And just do that consistently for a month.
Mm.
You can do anything. You can do that for a month and just see what the Lord does. Like, make space for him in the middle of your day and show the Lord that you trust him enough to press pause on your schedule because you want to be with him.
That's so good.
And yeah, I think you will find that there is a difference in your soul because of it.
I agree. And I would just add that if you have not downloaded Lectio 365, that's Lectio 365, I would encourage you to do that as well, because that's something
Yes.
to play and listen. And it's usually 8 to 10 minutes. So it's not like it's a huge chunk of time. Anybody can do it. Start your day off with that. So, man, Wade, I can't thank you enough for your time today. I just,
I've loved it. Thank you.
I really appreciate you. And I just want to encourage people, you can follow him at Wade Joye on Instagram. Check out his podcast, Dreamers and Disciples. Also, he is you are a worship leader coach. And so is there maybe some information you can share? Like if you're a worship leader listening, or you know somebody that, hey, and they really need to go through his coaching, what information can you share on that?
Yeah, if you just go to wadejoy.com, there's some information there. I just released a course called Performer to Pastor,
Okay.
level up from leading songs to serving people. And so the course is closed for the rest of the year, but I'll reopen it probably in January. But there's still other options of how I can work with you. Just go to wadejoy.com.
Yeah. And that is where they can also download the free ebook. Is that correct?
Yes, you can get the ebook at wadejoy.com as well. And don't forget to put the E on the joy. People forget
Yes,
that
almost forgot
sometimes.
that. Almost forgot that. Yes, it's Joy with an E at the end, Joye. So yeah, don't forget that. Well, brother, man, as always, honored, grateful, and look forward to reading that book when it comes out, man. And I
Thank you.
appreciate your podcast. I appreciate everything you do to help pour into people, because you're definitely pouring into me from a distance, and I appreciate that, man.
I feel the exact same way about you. I really appreciate your heart, your ministry, and just, when I was at your church earlier this year, just seeing your passion for people's inner world. You weren't just
Mm,
trying to have people look apart. You really want them to experience transformation in Jesus.
yeah,
And just the way you're leading it really, really inspires me. So thank you.
I appreciate that. Don't forget, guys, you were made to win, and winning starts within.